Hmm?
And the American people must be willing to take their country back. By what means? One, let me say this. Let's come together as the American people and put together a platform, a political agenda. And every politician that does not agree to that political agenda, we declare war on that politician and get them the hell out of office. That's something that black people, white people, brown people, Asian people, everybody can agree on. That we need a universal agenda, a platform, a program.
But how can you argue for, I mean, I like this new counter, General Cornell, universal agenda, unity, but just, 2 months ago, you were arguing that white people should suffer for the sins of their father. So how are you sitting here today?
White people should pay reparations. And I still believe that.
Well, a white person getting up every day, going to Walmart, but you want unity. All right.
This house, we're all living in this body. Yes, we have our differences, and we must deal with those differences. But I'll be damned if we'll let the house continue to burn and we all burn up in it. We deal with our differences at the appropriate time and place. But right now, the house is on fire. And we got to come together collectively to save America from destruction, because America's going the way of Babylon.
All right, we're back on the record on Mark Jensen's case. The jury is back in the courtroom. State is continuing with their case in chief. Who's the next witness for the state?
The state calls Therese DeFazio.
All right, let's have her come up. For the record, it's number 13 on your list, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Yes, I can. What about you? Would you prefer to sit over here?
So I'm starting first, so... Okay, thank you.
But I can see her. I can see her no matter where you sit. So
You can come up here by the witness stand.
I can see her on corners.
Remain standing, raise your right hand, I'll swear you in. You solemnly swear the testimony is meant to be the truth, whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God. Thank you. You can have a seat. Get as close as you can to the microphone and spell your first and last name for the reporter.
Therese, Therese, DeFazio, capital D-E, capital F-A-A-Z-I-O.
Thank you. Go ahead, Ms. McNeil.
Ms. DeFazio, in 1998, where did you work?
I worked at Southport Elementary School.
Were you a teacher there?
Yes.
What grade did you teach?
I taught third grade at that time.
And how long did you work at Southport Elementary School?
Oh, over 20 years.
Are you retired now?
Yes.
And when did you retire?
June of 2013.
Okay, so I just have a couple of questions about the school first. Back in 1998, when did school start?
It started a little bit before 8 o'clock.
So in the morning time, it would be a little bit before 8 o'clock?
Yeah.
And do you know what time school would end typically?
It's around between 2:30 and 2:45, I think, at that time.
So if there weren't after-school activities, that's when the students would generally be let out?
Yes.
And then in terms of the beginning of the school year, when did school start at the beginning of the school year?
Well, that year Labor Day was late, so we had to start before Labor Day. Labor Day was the 7th of September. So we started, I believe it was September 1st, and we had an open house the night before. I'm not positive of those dates, but I'm pretty sure that's it.
So early September.
Yeah.
And so back in 1998, before the start of the school year, was there an open house?
Yes, the night before school started.
At that open house, did you meet a person by the name of Julie Jensen?
Yes, Julie Jensen was there. Her son was in my class, David, and she came up to me and volunteered to be a room mother. And I had a couple room mothers that year.
And you said her child was named David Jensen?
Yes, it was.
And so how old are third graders?
About 8, or some of them could be a little bit closer to 9, but he was 8 at the time.
So 8 turning into 9 is 3rd grade?
Right.
And so when you met Julie Jensen at that open house, did she volunteer to be a room mother?
Yes, she wanted to help me out, so I asked her what kind of skills or things she'd be interested in to help with. My first question to her was, can you come and work in the computer lab with me? Because at that time that was a brand new thing to have computers in the school. And she says, oh, no, I can't do that. So then I questioned her some more about what she could do, and she helped me out then later on in the tutoring kids in the classroom.
Okay, so let me go back to that conversation then. So is that something that you generally do with room mothers, figure out the ways they can help you?
Right, because you don't know the people right then. They're first time coming to meet you too. So you have to find out what their interests are, and she was real happy to come and help me. She just couldn't, she says, help me in the computer lab unless I could have somebody open up the program for her, she says, and I can type.
All right. Did she say anything about turning on a computer?
Oh, she said, I can't even turn on a computer. She said, my son David helps me. He turns it. We got a new IBM at home, she said, and I have to ask David to come and teach me. And later on in the year, I found out more about how little she knew.
And did she describe any ability to type?
Yes, she could type. She says, but I only type 35 words a minute. And I says, oh, that's how many I do. That's how I remembered it, because we're slow typers.
And now, when you're talking to Julie Jensen about being a room mother, did you have any idea whether she had done this in the past for other grades for David, or did you not know?
At that point, when I met her, I did not know.
And did you find out more information about that later?
No, I didn't.
So you're interviewing her to see what she might be helpful with.
Right.
Now, as you met Julie Jensen, can you just describe for us your impression of her, how she looked physically?
When I met her, she's a petite woman, blonde hair, and very sweet person, very gentle person, soft-spoken.
And so did Julie Jensen, in fact, work in your room as a room mother that year?
Yes, she did. She came in at about 9 o'clock. She was always on time. At 9 o'clock, she would be there. And stay until 11, because then she had to go and pick up her 3-year-old Dougie at the time. Doug is David's younger brother, at daycare, or it's like a preschool daycare. And she would work with me from 9 until 10:30. At 10:30, our music teacher would come in and teach, so that would give us time to go to do some things in what we called a side room to the classroom, and she could help me do some more things, and that's basically what she helped me with.
Now, was this on a set day of the week?
Yeah, every Wednesday.
So Wednesdays, 9 to 11?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Now, was Julie generally on time?
Oh, she was always punctual. So when she didn't show up one Wednesday, I had to ask how she was doing. Her son told me.
So before December of 1998, did she show up every Wednesday?
Yes, every single Wednesday.
And can you just tell us your interactions with her over these weeks working with the students? What did you observe?
She was very good with the kids with math and listened to kids read. She was very good at all of that. And then at 10:30, we would go into the side room, and she'd help me with either doing some filing or correcting some papers, cutting out things like that. And she was very efficient.
And did she help out students who were not her son?
Oh, yes. Any student who needed her help when they came in.
Now, in terms of David, how would you describe him as a student?
He was an excellent student, and he had straight A's. He was just really smart. And he also was kind of shy at that age. He was a little bit shy.
So on these Wednesdays, once it got to be 10:30, how would your class change?
They would stay in the room, and we'd go to this side room, which had a glass wall that we could see through to the classroom. while the music teacher would be teaching, she was in there with me. And while we were correcting papers and things, she'd ask me questions about raising sons, because I had 2 sons. Mine were much older, though. They were in high school and college. But she liked to talk about, the boys, like I would with my friends when I was raising my kids. You share knowledge and information about how to raise sons.
And so you and Julie are not in the classroom anymore. You're off to the side.
Right.
And so that gives you time to talk about other topics not in the class. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And so you're describing one of these conversations about talking about raising boys. Is that
Yes.
correct? And so did Julie have any specific questions about that you can recall?
I don't recall the specific questions. It's mostly about, getting them into sports, music, things like that. College for the future. How do you save up for college? Things like that. Otherwise, I don't remember anything else.
And did she seem to be thinking about David's future education?
Yes, she wanted to, but I don't recall details about that.
And is that when you talked about college?
Yes, we mentioned college, yeah, because one of my sons was in college.
Now, at some point, did Ms. Jensen talk to you about recognizing your name?
Yes, one time she was kind of hesitant to ask me, but she says, "Do you have a brother-in-law that is named Paul DeFazio?" And I says, "Yes, that's my brother-in-law."
And so why did she bring that up based on what she said?
Basically, she was curious because we had the same last name. And then I says, "Well, yes, Paul is a psychotherapist." And she said, "Oh, I'm going to see him for marriage counseling."
So she talked about having seen what she learned was your brother-in-law.
Right.
And what did she say that she saw him for?
For marriage counseling. She said that she sheepishly told me that she had an affair. She says with like a one-night stand sort of thing. She says that she regretted it right as soon as she had done it. But she talked to her husband about it and said she wanted a divorce, or he wanted a divorce. I don't remember who wanted a divorce, but they were thinking about divorce. And she said, well, let's try marriage counseling first. So that's why they're trying to save their marriage through marriage counseling.
Now, this is a topic that is fairly sensitive, talking to someone about an affair and marriage counseling. So was that surprising to you, given your relationship with Julie Jensen at that time?
Well, I've been seeing her every Wednesday since September, and parents usually do confide in me and things. They really feel that the teacher is somebody they can trust, usually, and so they can talk to us about family life or anything. They just open up.
And so other parents have talked to you about detailed family life?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Over the years, many times.
Now, did Ms. Jensen tell you anything at all about how her husband reacted or treated her after the affair?
She said that he was watching everything she did and asking her where she was going when she'd go out, what time she'd be back. She says a lot more than he would normally. He was being very controlling over where she went and what she did.
And did she describe anything where she believed that her husband was critical of her?
She said, this happened later on, about conversation we were having one Wednesday. She said that, I'm trying to think, before conferences, she was talking to me about, she was worried about the conferences that were coming up on November 18th. And so we had a conversation about that, and she said she wanted to know what I was going to bring up. And I said, well, you know your son, he's a wonderful kid, he's just great. But I was going to bring up something about David having tics and eye tics. And I know that she didn't want me to bring that up because she said he'll be very, he'd yell at me. That's how she said it. He'll yell at me if you bring that up.
And so he, meaning her husband, right?
Yes.
And so this was something, you said, a conversation that occurred leading up to the time of conferences?
Right. It was the Wednesday before conferences.
And in terms of these facial tics, what do you mean by that for David?
His eye would have like a tick in it, blinking, and I don't know, I can't remember how to explain that. I mean, it's just the eye is bouncing around a little bit, the eyelid.
And so this was important enough to you that you brought it up with Ms. Jensen?
Well, I only brought it up because she was so worried about conferences coming up.
And this was something that you were going to say at the conference?
Right.
And the expectation would be that Julie would be there, but also Mark Jensen?
Yes.
And when Julie was describing to you her concerns about this conference, had she talked about a prior conference she had attended about David?
She said when David was in second grade, that conference was fine. They went to the conference. She says he sat there quiet. Mark sat there quietly, and they had a conversation with the teacher. But she says when we got home, he yelled at me and told me I'm a terrible mother and I don't take care of the kids. And I says, well, isn't David a straight-A student in second grade? She says, oh, yeah, he's a good student. But he would nitpick and find some little thing that he'd bring up that came up at the conference and would just yell at her.
And so then how did that cause you to react when this conference actually happened?
Well, when we had the conference, it was November 18th, I was careful in how I approached anything. I tried to be as positive as I could, which was easy because David was a wonderful student and no behavioral problems. And then I just kind of gently brought the conversation around to the eye tics and said, I think you should take him to a doctor and find out why he's having those eye tics. I says, I'm not a doctor, and you need to have a professional take a look at him.
And you said that was November 18th of 1998. Is that
Yes.
accurate?
Yes.
Okay. And so then, was that a Wednesday, do you recall?
Yes, it was.
And so then the next time you would have seen Julie Jensen, is that the next week?
Yes, on November 25th. She came in at a regular time.
And at that time, were you particularly interested in how the conference had went for her at home?
Right. I asked her, I says, so when you got home, did you get yelled at or did everything go fine? She says, well, he told me I can call the doctor after I pestered him several times, she says, about the doctor. He finally admitted, yes, you can go and call the doctor. But then he wouldn't speak to me at all. She said he would just ignore me, pretend I wasn't there.
And when you were talking to Julie Jensen on November 25th, did you make any observations about her demeanor?
Yes. We went into the side room at about 10:30. She'd been doing fine all morning, and then we brought him into the into the side room, and I said, "Is something bothering you?" And she was kind of like doing this with her hands. I says, "Come on, tell me, what's the matter?" She said, "Oh, I don't think I should tell you." She goes, and I said, "Well, when you're ready, I'm here for you. I'll listen."
And so you made that gesture with your hands. Would you describe that as hand-wringing?
Yes.
And so then at that point, she hesitated to tell you anything?
She was hesitating, but then after I said to her that when you're ready to talk to me, that's fine. If you want me, I'm here. And she thought for a few seconds, and she says, well, I'd like to tell you something. I think my husband was going to kill me last weekend. And I looked at her surprised. I said, that's not something you hear from a parent. And I said, I repeated, I said, you said what? And she said that he was going to kill me. I said, you know what, we better have this conversation down in privacy in the teacher's lounge, because I didn't know if anybody could hear us from the side room. So we proceeded down to the lounge, in the teacher's lounge, to talk about it.
Just more privately?
Yes.
All right, so when you got to the teacher's lounge, describe that conversation for us.
Well, she said that she found some notes next to his. She was cleaning the house, and she cleaned in his room and his desk area there. she found some notes there. It had list, like a grocery list. It had things like, she said, it had drugs, syringes. I think it even said needles, on like a grocery list. And I said, "You're sure that those are his notes?" She said, "Yes." So,
now, if I can follow up on that, did she describe how she came across this list?
it was sitting right next to his computer, and she was cleaning the room.
And so she brought that up to you as something that caused her concern?
Yes.
Okay.
Because she said he never took drugs, so she didn't, and she wasn't thinking he ever needed a syringe or a needle or anything. So she just couldn't understand why that note was there.
And when you're having this conversation with her, did she say anything else about the computer?
Whenever she'd come into the room and he was on the computer, he'd either turn the screen or turn it off and wouldn't let her see what he was doing. And she asked him once, "Well, why are you always turning off the computer?" And he'd say, "Well, I'm done with my work for today."
And again, this is on the topic of things she saw that she thought were concerning.
Yes.
And so when Ms. Jensen is talking to you about this list, which has drugs on it, did she say anything about what that made her think?
She was worried that he was going to try and kill her with an overdose of some kind of drug.
And what were your thoughts when you heard this?
I said to her, if you're in danger and you're feeling you're going to have something happen to you, you need to tell someone in authority. So first of all, I said, you need to call the police. She's in Pleasant Prairie, so I said, you need to call the Pleasant Prairie police. She says, "Oh, I've already done that. I've talked to someone over there." And then I says, well, and then I picked up the phone book and I said, we should look up Women's Horizons. I says, they can help you too. If you feel that you're in danger with him, you need to go to Women's Horizons and get some help. And she said, "No, I have to be here for my boys." She says, "I'm not going to leave my boys." And I said, "Well, you can take your children to Women's Horizons." And she says, "Oh, no, I can't. He knows a lot of people in this town." And she says, "He'd find me, and he'd probably tell everybody that I was crazy, and my kids would be taken away from me."
Now, before we move past this list, did Julie ever describe to you when talking about this list an incident where her husband was offering her something to eat or drink?
Yes, he brought her something to drink one day, and she says, "I wouldn't take it." She says, "Since I saw those notes, I have been eating out of anything that I pick up or I have made, or I go out to eat." She says, "I have not taken anything from him because I'm afraid he's going to put something, like if there is a poison or something, into a drink." And she didn't want to take that chance.
And so when you're talking to her about getting help and offering her various options, what did she say she was going to do?
She says, "I'm going to get a plan. I'm working on one right now." She says, "I'm trying to get a place in Illinois. A friend has said he'd get me a place in Illinois where I can hide out. I can take the boys with me." She says, "I've told the police about it. I'm trying to get a job, but she says kind of difficult because Dougie's only just turning 3, and she wanted to get him into at Southport we had a special classroom for preschool, and he could be a peer helper for children who had special needs in that classroom. But she hadn't gotten to that yet. She was about to. She also had been looking for jobs, but she says because Dougie was only in this preschool daycare for a couple hours, 2.5 hours in the morning, she says that nobody's going to hire me for something like that. So she was not sure what she could do with that, but she was going to try. And
Okay, so she wasn't rejecting help or saying she was going to do nothing. She just described a different way of doing it.
yeah, different way of doing it.
Now, when you're hearing this conversation with Ms. Jensen, what did you do after hearing these things?
Well, we were finishing up our conversation about 11 o'clock. I had to get back to my classroom because the music teacher was in there and leaves at 11. She had to go pick up Dougie. So I looked her straight in the eye and held onto her shoulders, and I says, Julie, you need to get some help, and if you need any help, you need to call right away to get it. It could be Women's Horizons, it could be your police officer you talk to. I says, but you need to get some help. And she says, I will. I'm getting my plan in together. I'm going to be ready in another week or two. I'll be ready to go. And so then I told her, well, she asked me not to tell anyone. I says, but I have to tell my principal this. I can't keep a secret like this. So after I went back to my classroom, lunch came around about 40 minutes later. I went to the principal and told her what happened. And so we both knew about it.
Now, when you're having this conversation about Ms. Jensen's fear about her husband killing her, was the idea of suicide ever brought up?
She never mentioned suicide, no.
And did she ever say anything to you about whether she would commit suicide?
Oh, she said to me that she was doing all of this to protect her relationship with her kids, because she said, I would never leave my children. And she said, I got this plan going so I could take my children. If I don't have a plan, she said, he will just make sure that he gets a good lawyer to say that I'm crazy, and I will not get my kids or even visitation rights.
And so did Ms. Jensen ever specifically deny to you that she would commit suicide?
Well, I never asked her about suicide at all. We never talked about suicide.
Now, to go back to the discussion about counseling that Ms. Jensen had told you about, did she ever say anything about what her husband had said about her in counseling?
He said, she told me that whenever they went to counseling, Mark would tell lies to the counselor, a psychotherapist it is. So she would tell, she said that she would tell what was going on, and he'd make up lies and tell lies all the time about her to make her look like she had a mental problem.
And so when Ms. Jensen is describing her current concern about leaving her husband, was it similar to that she was afraid her husband would make up lies about her?
Yes.
Now, did Ms. Jensen specifically say to you regarding the concerns about her husband making her overdose? Did she ever say to you that she was concerned that he would make it look like a suicide?
Yes, that's what she thought. That's why she didn't want to drink anything. She thought for sure he was trying to get her to drink some kind of drug or poison that would kill her.
And did Ms. Jensen express concern about if she looked crazy, her children being taken away?
Yes, if he made a good argument about her being crazy, he was also going to go pursue that she'd never see her kids again. He would make sure that she couldn't even come to visit the kids, because he was going to make her look like she wasn't capable of being with the children.
Now, did she say anything about whether she would ever leave her children?
She said she'd never leave her kids. That's why she didn't want to go to Women's Horizons in the first place. Even though I told her that the children could go with her, she said, it's not safe. He will find me there. I have to go someplace where I can really hide out.
Now, when Ms. Jensen, during this conversation, when she talked to you about this list of items, including the drugs and the syringe, did she ever tell you whether she gave that information to anybody else? Objection,
Yes.
hearsay.
Sustained.
Judge, this is a statement of Ms. Jensen and whether she gave the information to somebody else.
Well, this witness doesn't know.
Well,
You call that other witness then.
So Ms. DeFazio, I am asking you whether Ms. Jensen ever said anything to you about giving this list to someone else.
Yes, she said she gave it, put it in an envelope and gave it to our neighbor. And I don't know which neighbor, she didn't tell me.
She said neighbor.
A neighbor.
Now, this is all occurring on November 25th of 1998, this
Yes.
conversation? Is that correct?
Yes, that's the last time I saw her alive.
So the next Wednesday, would that have been December 2nd of 1998?
Yes, it would be.
And that Wednesday, were you expecting Ms. Jensen to be in your classroom at 9 a.m.?
Yes, and since it was a little after 9 and she was punctual, I said to David, is your mom coming today? And he said, oh, I forgot to give you a note. So he brought up the note, and it said, sorry, I can't come today, I'm sick. Can David go walking home with his friend Eric Shore instead of taking the bus tonight? And I said, and it said she was sick, so I said to David, David, it says here that she's sick. I says, what kind of sickness does she have? And he says, she's coughing really hard, and my dad won't let me go into...
Sorry, ma'am. I'm going to move to strike. This is hearsay.
I'm going to strike that answer.
So, Judge, it's a statement of a child about his mother's condition.
Oh, we didn't get it. You didn't lay the foundation like that. She just made the statement. So if you want to start over, I'll let you start over.
Thank you. So, Ms. DeFazio, once you read the letter and it said something about Julie being sick, did you then talk to David?
Yes,
And when you were talking to David, was he expressing concern about his mother?
yes, she was coughing so hard. He wanted to go and say goodbye to her before school started, and
I still move to strike as hearsay.
Well, I believe the foundation is laid about David Jensen expressing concern about his mother.
Go back in the jury room, folks. You could just stay there. You're fine. All right, the jury's outside the courtroom. Go ahead, Ms. Krause. What's your objection now?
My objection is that it's hearsay, and being concerned is not a exception to the hearsay rule. And they can call David Jensen, who can testify to what he said.
We know it's hearsay, so what's the exception?
So I believe it's an excited utterance because it's a description by a child of a significant medical condition of his mother, and this would have been within a couple hours of seeing her. And under the law, there's a greater latitude for statements by children being excited utterances. Commonly, it comes up in different kinds of cases, but I believe it would apply to this situation.
Well, I know the exception, excited utterance, but I didn't hear anything to tie that up as an excited utterance. I know it's a child that's talking to the teacher, but...
Okay, so, Judge, are you saying that if there's more information about how David appeared or looked
Right.
or was expressing this? Okay.
So as of now, the objection is sustained.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Bring him out. right, for now, the objection has been sustained, so go ahead, Ms. McNeil.
Did you make any observations about David when you were talking to him about his mother's condition that morning?
Well, he's a little upset. He said,
Judge, I still object as to what he said. Same grounds.
So, Ms. DeFazio, if you could just tell us what you mean by upset, just what you saw in his demeanor.
He was worried that his mom was sick.
Okay. And so, when he was expressing this worry to you, what did he say about that?
Objection, hearsay.
I think that's sufficient.
I'm going to sustain it.
Did David Jensen ever tell you anything that his father had said to him that morning?
Objection, hearsay.
It's a statement by the defendant.
Through
Overruled.
a different witness.
What's that?
Through a different witness, Judge. They can call David Jensen, who can testify to that statement.
Sustained.
Now, that note that you have described indicating that Julie Jensen was sick, did it also say anything about where David Jensen would be going that afternoon?
Yes, it asked if David could go home with his friend Eric Shore and walk over to his house instead of taking the bus. And they have to have permission to do that because of, liability, making sure the children are safe.
So there has to be a note if a student is not going to their own home.
Right.
And for David, the note was to go to his friend Eric Shore's house?
That's correct.
Now, is this something that happened on every Wednesday? That
No.
David?
No, he never went with anyone else before.
Okay, so that was an unusual part of the note as well?
Yes.
Now, I just have a few other questions about things that Julie said to you before that you learned that she died. Did Julie ever say to you whether she had expressed her concerns about Mark Jensen wanting to kill her to anybody else?
She told a police officer, she said was a friend of hers.
Objection, Judge.
This is Julie's statement, right?
Right.
All right, go ahead.
She said she told Lori, or I think her name is Laura, her sister-in-law, and her sister-in-law told her that
Move to strike as hearsay.
So right now the question is just who did Julie say that she told? So you've mentioned the police officer
Yeah.
and her sister-in-law. Do you recall anybody else?
and her friend, the neighbor.
Now, finally, going back to this affair that Julie had, did she ever say anything about how her husband reacted to it?
She said he was angry and he just started being more controlling over her, wanting to know where she's going and what she's doing.
Did she feel that he had ever forgiven her for the affair?
I don't know if she said anything about that.
Now, regarding that point, would it refresh your recollection to look at a prior statement that you made?
No, I don't think so.
So if you looked at something you said in the past, that would not refresh your recollection?
No, because that was 25 years ago. It's written down that if I said he didn't forgive her, then that's true, but I have no recollection about that.
Okay, so regarding your lack of recollection on that issue, I'm going to show you what is a statement from a prior hearing.
Okay.
Judge, I object. She just testified that it wouldn't refresh her memory.
I
because
agree.
so
She
long
just
ago.
said it's not going to help her.
So, if a witness testifies to lack of recollection, then the hearsay exception would be for the prior testimony of
I
an
understand.
unavailable witness.
But you just said it's not going to help her.
Right, but this is not to refresh recollection. This is the prior statement of a witness who now cannot remember. So the
You just said it's not going to help her.
so the
Let's move on.
Now, Ms. DeFazio, this is what we've been talking about is December 2nd of 1998.
Yes.
And so did anything, in terms of the next couple of days, did you learn that Julie Jensen had died?
Yes, I found out on December 4th, a Friday, right before school started.
And do you recall how you found out?
Mrs. Ashley, Carrie Ashley, she came up to me. She's one of the parents in my room, and she came up to me and said, did you hear Julie died? There's a whole bunch of police around the house and yellow caution tape, she said.
And so when you had heard that, what was your reaction?
Well, right away I thought, oh my God, what is going on here? I remembered our conversation about her saying that he was going to try to kill her. So I sent a note down to the principal. It was just, the bell had just rung to start school. So I sent a note down to the principal saying, I need to talk to a police officer right away. Did you hear Julie Jensen died? So she arranged for the officer Ratzberg to come in and talk to me after she got somebody to watch my classroom.
And so is this something happening that very Friday?
Yes.
And so after you spoke with Detective Ratzberg, did you also write something about what your recollections were?
I did, but he told me to write a general summary because he had taken extensive notes and went through a lot of questioning. And my principal was there too. She took extensive notes. I said to him when he asked me to write the summary, I says, well, do I have to write every single detail I just told you? And he says, no, just write a summary of this, of what you remember about what Julie has told you in your conversations and what she had said to you about her feelings about her husband.
And so that's what you did on December 4th of 1998. Is that accurate?
That's right. I did it at home.
So, Judge, is it possible to take a break at this moment?
How
There's an
long,
issue we need to take up outside the presence of the jury, Your Honor.
how long do we need a break?
5 minutes.
5 minutes? You heard them, folks. 5 minutes. We'll be back. We're in recess.
An evidentiary matter outside the presence of the jury. That's the reason that we needed the recess, was so that the jury would be excused, so we could have this legal discussion outside the presence of the jury.
What are we going to argue about?
The issue was the court's ruling on the admissibility of the ability to have this witness testify about prior testimony or admit the prior testimony of this witness.
I denied it.
I know you did, and you
Bringing
denied
the jury back.
Judge, you denied it, but you didn't allow the state to make its argument. So,
Your counsel made her argument.
Your Honor, you denied
Your
it.
counsel made your argument. Bring the jury back.
Your Honor, it's prior testimony. It's not being offered to refresh a recollection. It's prior testimony. It's admissible under 908.045 of the Wisconsin statutes. This witness is unavailable on that particular issue. We deserve to be heard on this, Your Honor. It's a first-degree murder case. We should be following the rules of evidence. The rules of evidence indicate this testimony is admissible, and it's an important part of this case.
The jury probably could hear you yelling.
Well, Your Honor, please, the state is entitled to make an argument on evidentiary issues.
Go ahead, make your record.
Under 908.045, with stats, subparagraph, under 908.04, a witness is deemed to be unavailable if she testifies to a lack of memory on the subject matter of the declarant's statement. That is what this witness testified to. She does not remember the statement. She said looking at the statement would not refresh her recollection. So it's not available to refresh her recollection. However, she's an unavailable witness, as defined by Section 908.04 on this particular issue. And then when you look at 908.045, subparagraph 1, former testimony, the following are not excluded by the hearsay rule if the declarant is unavailable as a witness. Paragraph 1, former testimony, testimony given as a witness at another hearing of the same or a different proceeding at the instance of or against a party with an opportunity to develop the testimony by direct, cross, or redirect examination with motive and interest similar to those of the party whom now offered. That is exactly what we have here. It's her prior testimony on an issue that she's now said she no longer recalls. Therefore, her prior testimony is admissible in this proceeding under 908.045, subparagraph 1.
Want to say anything?
I think
And please don't yell at me.
I won't, Judge. I think the issue is that they were attempting to refresh this witness's memory, and she advised everyone that that would not help. That's the concern, is that the prosecution attempted to refresh. That's not the statute that was just discussed. And this witness said, no, I'm sorry, that would not refresh my memory. If they want to impeach their witness with a prior inconsistent statement, that's different, but that's not what they attempted to do.
Your Honor, counsel specifically indicated it's prior testimony. That's she indicated that she was offering this as prior testimony. Those were the words right out of her mouth.
The words were, will this refresh your memory? Ms. DeFazio said, no. If I show you this testimony, it's not you testified on this day, you gave this answer. That's not the question that was asked. It was, will this refresh your memory? And she said, no. Those are two separate sections of the hearsay. So
and then after the witness had persisted in saying it would not refresh her recollection, then Ms. McNeil was going to ask her to read this prior question and this prior answer as prior testimony. And those are the words that she used, prior testimony. And at that point, the court sustained the objection. This is admissible as prior testimony under 908.045, subparagraph 1 of the Wisconsin statutes. And then, Your Honor, with respect to the issue of the statement that the child made to Ms. DeFazio, it is admissible as an excited utterance. I understand the court can rule against us on that point, although we did lay the groundwork under the broad allowance that the courts have developed in the state of Wisconsin and actually across the country about the admission of prior statements by child witnesses. But it's also the Wisconsin Supreme Court in State v. Dorsey said the court should consider the admissibility of children's statements under the residual hearsay exception as well, because there's an intrinsic trustworthiness of small children on such issues. So when you look at the statement that David Jensen made to this witness on the morning of December 2nd, 1998, when she indicated he was expressing concern about his mother's health, and he had provided her this statement, this note that Ms. Jensen had provided to her son. That is sufficient under the excited utterance standard, but it's also sufficient under the residual exception hearsay, which the Wisconsin Supreme Court has strongly endorsed courts should consider when considering the admissibility of child witnesses. Thank you.
I'll give you one chance to respond.
Thank you, Judge. I think the problem with David Jensen's specific statement is that Ms. DeFazio doesn't say anything about him being excited. In fact, what she testified to is she was surprised that Julie wasn't there at 9 o'clock, so she went to David and said, hey, your ma's not here, what's going on? And he said, oh, I forgot to give you this note. That doesn't sound excited.
Well, I ruled it wasn't an excited utterance.
Correct. So I don't have anything to add to that. I think they can call that witness and he can testify to it. As to the impeachment of their own witness, if they lay the foundation correctly and don't try to refresh her memory, then I think they can do that. But they can't try to refresh her memory. That's the problem.
Well, the problem I have is what this witness said under oath, that it's not going to help her.
Correct.
So we're not going to go in that area. So if you want to try to get it in some other way, you can. So bring the jury back. All right, the witness is still under oath. Go ahead, Ms. McNeil.
So, Ms. DeFazio, you expressed that you did not recall Julie Jensen making any statement about whether her husband had forgiven her for this affair. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Now, Ms. DeFazio, you have also testified at a prior hearing on these same topics. Is that accurate?
Yes.
All right, so I would direct the court and counsel's attention to the January 10th, 2008 transcript. I'm referring to page 156.
All right, I have to get there. There's only about 1,500 documents on this case.
So this is January 10th, 2008.
What page?
Is there a number? Because each one should be numbered.
So this would be document 26-5. Is that what you're looking for?
Each one has a number. What was the date of the filing?
So the transcript itself is from January 10th of 2008. Let me see if I can find the document number.
Each one has a document number. Did you say January 10th, 2008?
That is accurate.
And what page?
156.
156.
And I am referring to lines, let me get the correct lines here. It's right in the middle of that page. So can everyone see what I'm referring to?
All right, go ahead.
So I would ask the record to reflect that on that date, Ms. DeFazio was asked the question, did she ever make any statement to you about how he never forgave her for that affair? The answer was, quote, "Oh yes, she said he never forgave her for that. He felt that was a terrible, terrible thing she had done. He would never, ever forgive her," unquote. And so I'm just moving that portion of the transcript into evidence.
Can you mark it as an exhibit, or, I mean, how is somebody who is eventually going to look at this case in the future? it's not going to be easy to find the way it is now in the record, is what I'm saying.
Sure. This will be 6. Switched up here.
So for the record, this will be State's Exhibit 6 that the state is moving into evidence.
All right, it'll be received, subject to cross.
I have no further questions, thank you.
Cross-examination.
Thank you, Judge. Ms. DeFazio, I want to talk to you about some of the statements that you said you had discussed with Julie Jensen. Okay? You said that Julie Jensen said her husband knew a lot of people.
Yes,
And you knew that Mr. Jensen was a businessman.
yes,
Did you know he was a stockbroker?
yes,
And he lived in Kenosha
yes.
and worked in Racine.
I didn't know where his office was.
You just knew the type of work that he did.
Yes,
You also knew that Ms. Jensen knew a lot of people.
I didn't know
Did you know
that.
she grew up in Kenosha?
Yes, I did know she grew up in Kenosha.
Went to school in Kenosha?
We didn't ever talk about her schooling.
And she did talk, though, about knowing some law enforcement in Pleasant Prairie.
Yes,
And one of the people she talked about was a friend.
yes.
And she described this friend, Detective Ronald Cosman.
I don't know if she told me the name of the officer. I can't remember that.
She just might have said, I have a friend who works at the Pleasant Prairie Police
That's right.
Department. And did she make it sound like that was the friend she was talking to when she told you that she had talked to a friend at the police department?
She said that was one person she had told. She called him a friend, and I think she called her neighbor a friend.
Thank you. You also testified that she said Mark was controlling
Yes,
and that he became controlling after the affair.
yes,
And one of the ways that she was controlling, or that Mark was controlling, is he didn't want her to get a job.
that's correct.
She told you she wanted to get a job,
Yes,
but Mark wouldn't let her get a job.
right.
She said another way that he was controlling was Douglas being in daycare.
She didn't want, she said that Mark did not want Douglas in a longer daycare than he already was in.
And he was like in a morning daycare.
Right.
And Mark didn't want any longer daycare for Douglas.
That's what she said.
And she said that she actually wanted to put him in like a day-long school program.
It's a special needs program where he'd be the model for the other children who are unable to do things.
And that was kind of through the school district.
Right.
So she wanted to put Douglas in that type of program.
Yes. She hadn't done it yet, but she was going to.
One of the other things she talked to you about was that she didn't know how to use the computer.
Yes.
Did Ms. Jensen tell you that they've had a home computer since 1995?
No, she told me that she just got a new IBM computer
So
when
she said-
school started.
So when school started, they had just gotten a new IBM computer.
That's what she said.
Did she tell you that she had previously worked with stockbrokers
No,
and did trading with stockbrokers?
no.
Another thing she told you is that when she would come into the home computer room, Mr. Jensen would cover up the screen.
Yes,
Or turn it away, or turn it off so she couldn't see it.
That's correct.
And when she asked him why he was doing that, he's like, I'm done with work for the day.
Yes.
That's what she told you.
Well, I'm done with what I was working on.
Okay, so I'm done with what I was working on for the day.
Hmm?
She never said that he yelled at her when she came into the computer room.
No, I don't think she used the word yell at that time.
She also never told you that he'd just leave the computer on so she could randomly come upon whatever was on the screen.
No, she didn't say that he left it on.
He would either turn it off or turn it away.
Right.
You also talked to Miss Jensen about looking at computer history.
Yes.
And she said she didn't want to do that.
She didn't know how to do it.
She didn't know how to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the information you got from her.
Yes.
You never had a conversation with Mr. Jensen about any of your concerns.
No, I did not.
You never had a conversation with Mr. Jensen outside of the parent-teacher conference.
That's correct.
So I want to talk to you a little bit about the source of the information that you kind of got as it related to the Jensens. The source of Ms. Jensen not being able to use the computer was she told you that she couldn't.
Yes, and her son also told me that.
And
He said David told her, there's a day in school where we were talking about going into things in the computer, and David said, he was talking out of turn, which is, I say children should wait their turn, but he blurted out, oh, Mom doesn't know how to use a computer. I'm teaching her how. She doesn't even know how to turn it on.
So David was basically saying that he was teaching her how to use it.
Yes.
And this was in that school year.
Right. And we had a discussion since the other students heard him say that, I turned to the students, I said, well, do you have parents that don't know how to use a computer also? And they all raised their hands or said yes, because at that time, having a home computer was a new idea.
And you weren't aware that the Jensens have actually had a home computer since 1995?
No.
And you weren't aware that Julie Jensen used a Quicken program on a computer to balance their checkbook?
No, I do not.
She never talked to you about that?
No.
Never gave you that information?
No, I did not get that information.
Sorry, ma'am. Your relationship with Julie Jensen started in September of 1998.
Well, the open house was August 31st or something, so it was end of August and September, yeah.
Right before school started?
Right.
You had never met her prior to that?
Right.
Never had conversations with her prior to that?
Correct.
The other thing that Ms. Jensen talked to you about was that she recognized your last name, DeFazio.
Yes.
And she asked you if you knew Paul DeFazio.
Yes.
And you did know Paul DeFazio.
Yeah.
He's your brother-in-law.
Correct.
You know him to be a psychotherapist?
That's correct.
And what she told you was that she saw him as it related to marriage counseling.
Yes.
She never said she saw him as it related to depression.
No.
She also said that she was unhappy with the counseling with your brother-in-law.
I don't recall her saying she was unhappy with it, just that it wasn't helping them.
She was unhappy because Mark Jensen, I think you testified on direct, was making lies up.
Oh, okay, yeah, you're right. Mm-hmm.
And one of the things she was worried about was that Mark Jensen was going to make her look crazy.
Yes.
And that was like in 1991.
Oh, I didn't know what year it was that she said that. I thought it was recently that she'd been going to counseling with Paul.
So she didn't tell you that the counseling she had with your brother-in-law was 7 years earlier?
She said it was related to the affair she was having, but I didn't know what year the affair was.
And it'd be fair to say, Ms. DeFazio, that your husband's also a psychotherapist.
That's correct.
At any point, did you counsel her about, like, the professionalism of psychotherapists and their ability to really understand what's going on in a relationship.
I'm objecting to the relevance of this.
And where are we going with it for
The
relevant?
only question I was going to ask her on that.
We'll let you ask the one question.
Thank you. Ma'am, did you ever counsel her on psychotherapists and their ability to really understand what's going on?
No, I didn't counsel her on that.
During the conversation, I think you said this conversation was on November 25th,
Yes.
and that was the conversation that you had about DeFazio and brother-in-law and all of
No,
that.
the DeFazio she mentioned to me back in October or September. It was earlier on.
That's when she had mentioned that she had seen or was seeing your brother-in-law.
Right, because now she'd been with me a few weeks then, and I think it was like in probably the end of September she brought that up to ask me.
One of the things she did talk to you about is that she had an affair,
Yes,
and she told her husband about it,
yes,
and there was a conversation about them having a divorce.
yes,
And at that time, David was a young child.
yes.
Ms. Jensen didn't tell you that she had previously been treated for depression.
No, we never talked about depression.
And in November, during these conversations, she actually never told you about seeing a family doctor about depression.
I'm objecting. It doesn't align with the time frame that.
I'll be more specific.
Go ahead, rephrase the question.
After August 31st of 1998, Ms. Jensen did not tell you that she had been seeing her medical doctor and discussed concerns about depression.
Not that I recall, no. I don't remember ever having a conversation about depression with her.
You testified a little bit about Julie Jensen making statements to you that she was afraid her husband would make her look unstable.
Yes,
And she was afraid of losing her children if her husband made her look unstable.
yes,
Again, this information came from Julie Jensen.
yes,
Mr. Jensen never said this to you.
no.
I want to talk a little bit about David Jensen. He was in your class the entire year.
Yes,
He was a good student,
excellent student.
no behavioral problems.
None.
He did his work,
Yes,
didn't get in trouble.
nope.
What you would talk about as like a exemplary student.
I had a lot of exemplary students that year.
That's great. And he's one of them.
Yeah,
Yeah. But at some point you saw the tics.
yes.
And it seemed that it was like if there was a test or he was under stress.
Whenever there's a test coming up, definitely I saw the tics more often than any other time.
And at some point you talked to Julie about the eye tics.
Yes,
And did she, prior to the conference, did she ever say she had a conversation with her husband about the eye tics?
I don't think she did.
Did she ever say whether they had talked to the family doctor about it?
No.
And what she told you, though, is that she was concerned about you bringing it up at the conference
That's correct.
because of something that happened at a second grade conference for David,
When she got home, something had happened, yes, that he got upset.
based upon something that was said at the second grade conference.
Correct.
Did you ever talk to the second grade teacher about issues that David might have
No,
had?
I did not.
You also continued to teach David Jensen after Miss Jensen passed away.
Yes,
And at some point in early 1999, just a month or two after Miss Jensen passed away, David Jensen's tics started to diminish.
yes,
And by the end of the school year, they were very slight.
correct.
Would it be fair to say that it was a sharp contrast between what you saw between September and November of 1998?
I wouldn't say a sharp, no. It was something gradual.
I meant the difference between the end of the school year and the beginning of the school year. Was there a contrast there? Could you tell the difference?
A slight difference, yes.
And do you know whether he was ever treated for those tics medically?
After that conference, we never talked about the tics again, except to say that Mark gave her permission to call the doctor and to get an appointment so that they could discuss the tics.
But David Jensen continued to be in your classroom.
Yes.
You would have continued to have conversations with Mark Jensen about his child.
I never called the home to talk to Mark. He never came to school except for the conference.
But if you had seen the tics continue...
I didn't have really much of a chance because that was the last time I saw her, was November 25th.
I meant after Miss Jensen's death, you would have continued to teach and have contact with Mr. Jensen.
He never contacted me after that. The only time was at the wake. I talked to him.
And my question is, you don't know if David Jensen ever received medical treatment for the tics?
No, because the conversation was not ever brought up again because I didn't see Mr. Jensen.
Okay, thank you. So I want to talk about this conversation at the conference. Mr. Jensen was present.
Yes.
Ms. Jensen was present.
Yes.
And you were really careful about how you brought up that tic conversation.
Correct.
And that's not because of what you saw in front of you, but what you heard from Ms. Jensen.
That's right.
And when you brought it up, Mr. Jensen responded, we'll have him go to the doctor.
He didn't say that. I had to pull it out of him. When we were at the conference, he was very silent and didn't converse with me at all. When I was, usually when you have parent-teacher conference, there's a two-way street and you're talking to both parents. He did not respond at all. So then when the tic question came up, or problem came up, I looked at him to see what his response was. And he still just sat there. And then I finally, after we were almost at the end of the conference, I looked at him straight in the eye and I said, so are you going to take him to a doctor about the tics? And he didn't move at first. He just sat there, and then all of us, I asked him again, and he shook his head yes very slightly, and that's all he said.
He didn't seem upset.
He was just very calm and quiet the whole conference.
And when I mean he didn't seem upset, when you brought up tics of his son, he didn't yell at you.
No, he didn't say a word.
Didn't get angry with you.
No.
And sometimes you can tell when someone's angry, even if they don't say a word, maybe by the look on their face.
Mm-hmm.
Or is that a yes?
Yes.
Or their face might get like red or flush.
Yes.
Those aren't things you observed on Mr. Jensen.
No, he just was sitting there quietly the whole time.
And you don't have any knowledge of any conversations, except for what Ms. Jensen told you, about any conversations between Mr. Jensen and Ms. Jensen about their children's tics or David's tics?
Just that conference at the end.
Did Julie talk to you about her family, her immediate family,
No.
her home life?
No.
On December 2nd, you realized Julie Jensen had not come to school at the 9 o'clock that she generally shows up at.
Right.
And at that point, you went up to speak to David.
No, he called him up to my desk.
So you said, David Jensen, please come up here.
Yeah.
And you asked him why his mom wasn't there.
Right.
And at some point after that, he produced this note.
I forgot to give you a note.
And it was with the note that you found out why Julie Jensen wasn't going to be there.
Right.
And you recognized the handwriting of Julie Jensen.
Well, it was printed, and usually in his, they had assignment notebooks at that time. If she had anything to say in assignment notebook, she always wrote in cursive. And that note was just printed.
You recognized the handwriting.
I figured it was her because I didn't know any better.
Ma'am, you already testified that you gave a statement on December 4th, 1998. Correct?
Yeah.
You spoke to Detective Ratzberg?
Yes, I spoke to Dr. Ratzberg.
And you testified on direct that you, after speaking to Detective Ratzberg, he asked you to write up a summary of what you remembered.
Right.
And one of the things you did write in your summary was about Julie Jensen's handwriting.
He had asked me if I thought it was her handwriting.
And what you told him, or what you wrote in your own summary, not what you told Detective Ratzberg and he put in his notes, but what you wrote in your own summary when you had time to sit down and think about it, was Julie's handwriting looked normal. By that, I mean it didn't look different in any way.
And I was referring to...
Ma'am, my question is that what you wrote?
Yes. May I explain, though, what I thought normal meant?
No, I didn't ask that, but I might.
Oh.
But if you could just wait a second, please.
Judge, I'm objecting to that. The witness has said she's going to tell the whole truth, and she's trying to do that.
Well, she did answer the question, though.
Well, I believe she doesn't think she's answered
No,
it.
I don't
Well,
feel
then
it.
you have redirect, right? We still have that.
Yes, I do.
All right. So make a note for yourself. Ask question.
Ma'am, you also testified on August 30th of 2007.
If that's the correct date, I
The
I
first
don't-
time you testified in this case.
Okay, was that the date?
Yes. And on page 4, line 18, I don't know the document number, Judge.
Is it marked as an exhibit?
It's not, because I'm just going to cross her on it.
All right, let me, any idea when it was filed?
August 30th of 07?
Counselor, did you say August 30th?
Yeah.
August 30th of what year? Is it
07.
07?
2007, Judge.
In the, is it in a transcript?
Yes.
And what's the date of the transcript?
Like the date the transcript was filed?
No, the proceeding,
August 30th of 2007.
August 30th of 2007. Was it a motion hearing?
I can show the court if the court would like.
Yeah,
I believe
why
it
don't
was filed on January 10th of 2012.
you- January 10th of 2020?
Of 2012 document. No. Oh, never mind. My apologies. That's the federal.
Ma'am, you were asked, and the handwriting looked normal-like, and you answered right, like it had looked before. Your answer was yes.
Okay, I don't remember, but normal to me meant I thought if she was sick, when I'm sick, I don't write as clearly and nicely as I would if I'm sick.
It didn't look shaky to you?
Right.
She was coherent in the note?
The note looked like it was easily to be read, very simple.
Gave directions on where she wanted her son to go after school?
Yeah, if she wrote it.
And what child she wanted her son to go home with?
Correct.
And after you received the note, you didn't Ms. Jensen?
No,
Didn't call her on the phone?
no, didn't have time.
I want to go to that conversation that you had on November 25th when she made this statement to you that she thought her husband was going to kill you. Okay?
Yes, okay,
At some point, she said that she saw a list
yes,
just sitting out next to the computer.
yes,
And on that list, it had information, or it listed drugs
yes,
and syringes.
yes.
And I think today you added needles.
Yeah, I remember that she had said needles. I don't remember putting that in my summary, though.
And she said that her husband doesn't use drugs.
That's correct. At least she didn't think he did, she said.
Did she talk to you about his use of prescription drugs?
No.
And based upon the statement she made to you, you suggested she contact law enforcement.
Yes,
And she told you she has this friend that she's talked to at the Pleasant Prairie Police Department.
correct.
You also discussed with her going to a women's shelter,
Yes,
and she said no.
that's correct.
She couldn't go without her kids.
Right.
And you said, that's okay because you can take your kids.
She says, I'm worried about them being in a place like that. She didn't want to bring them there.
I get that. But you told her that, don't worry, you can take your kids.
I did.
And she said she was working on a different plan.
Yes,
And that plan was offered by a friend.
yes,
And that was for her to go someplace to hide out.
correct.
She didn't have the place yet.
No, he
The friend
said
was still working on it.
was working on it, and it was going to be in Illinois, she said.
And they were going to find a place in a week or two.
Correct.
She also said that, I'm sorry, ma'am. Did she tell you that her friend had offered her money?
No,
Did she tell you that her friend had already offered her a place and she turned them down?
no,
This list that she said she found, I think you described it like a grocery list,
yes,
things to buy.
correct.
And she said she found it in the computer room.
That's right, next to the computer.
She didn't tell you the name of any drugs listed on it.
No, she didn't.
She didn't tell you the list had aspirin written on it.
No,
She also didn't tell you that the list had razors on it.
no, I don't think so.
Did she tell you that it had lists of last names on it?
No,
And when she was talking to you during these kind of confidant meetings that you had in the
side room.
side room,
Yeah.
she didn't tell you she had gone to nursing school previously.
No, not that I recall.
Judge, can I have one moment? I just want to touch base on one of the concerns that Julie talked to you about on November 25th. She said that she was really worried Mark Jensen was going to have her seen as crazy
Yes,
and unstable,
yes,
and as if she had mental problems.
correct.
Nothing further. Thank you, ma'am.
Any redirect from the state?
Yes, just a few things to clarify, Ms. DeFazio. When Ms. Jensen was describing for you this plan that she was developing, was that a plan in contrast to running away to a women's shelter?
Yes,
And so did it sound to you that it was more orderly or organized?
that's what she had said. I wanted to be more orderly, and so I can make sure the children are going to be okay with everything.
And also, it looks less crazy, right, than running away all of a sudden to have a plan?
Objection, speculation.
Overruled. Go ahead, let's finish up.
So you may answer that question.
Yes, she thought that if she had a plan, it would be a more stable thing to do instead of like running off, because then that would look like she's just thinking in the moment and not thinking about the future.
Now, did Ms. Jensen express fear to you that Mark Jensen would find her in a woman's shelter?
Yes,
Are you familiar at all with Mark Jensen's handwriting?
no,
Now, it sounded like you wished to explain yourself when you were questioned about whether what your description of Ms. Jensen's handwriting or the handwriting you saw on December 2nd in that note. So just please explain yourself on that.
Well, when I said normal in my summary notes, I meant it wasn't shaky, because it could, when someone's sick, as much as she was coughing so hard. When you're coughing, you kind of jerk with your handwriting. Thought maybe, I didn't see anything jerky like that. I noticed it was printed, and she normally wrote in cursive in the assignment notebook, but I figured it was a note from home. I assumed it was from Julie. It could have been Mark that wrote it. I don't know.
So just as you sit here today and you're recollecting that note, you cannot say that you believe Julie Jensen wrote that note.
Yeah, I can't be sure.
Now, in the course of knowing Ms. Jensen, did you ever see her use a computer?
No.
And when you were asked on cross-examination about this conversation with Ms. Jensen about computer history, who brought up the idea of computer history?
I did. I said at that time, the Macintosh had what they called a cache, C-A-C-H-E, I think it's spelled. And it's like today on your computer, you have one of the tabs says history, and you can go back and look in to see where you've been if it isn't deleted. And so I suggested to her if she was worried about him being on the computer and she didn't know where he was going, she could look up the cache. I said that word at that time. She did not know how to do it, and was not familiar with IBMs. IBMs and Macintosh were completely different from each other at that time. They weren't that the same like they are now. You can go to any computer and they're pretty much the same. But at that time they were different. And so I did not know how to tell her to go into the history at all.
Okay, so you bring up this idea and Ms. Jensen's response is confusion?
Right, she did not know what to do.
Now, one other thing about Douglas, can you describe for us what this program Ms. Jensen wanted him to do at the school?
We have a preschool program at that time at Southport where 3 and 4-year-olds could be in a classroom with special needs children. You had to apply for it, explain how your child was, if you wanted your child to be a mentor to the children who had special needs. It was a kind of a new idea at that time to bring two kinds of children together into a classroom at the age of 3. Dougie was not 3 at that moment. He was about to be 3, and so she was going to try and get him in once he would be turning 3.
So this is not daycare?
No, it's not a daycare. It is an actual preschool classroom type situation.
And so Ms. Jensen, did she express to you that she wanted to do this with Dougie?
Yes. She thought if she only went in with the 2.5 hours that they give you at a preschool, at that time you didn't go for a whole morning or a whole afternoon. You went for like 2.5 hours. And she had to leave by 11 when we were talking that day to get home, or get to the school to pick him up. I don't know the name of the school he was at, forgot. But she said, that's not enough hours. Nobody will hire me for 2.5 hours. She said, so to get a good job, she needed him to be in a situation where he'd be all day. And then she wouldn't have to worry about going after 2.5 hours to pick him up.
And so Ms. Jensen's idea was not more daycare, it was this program?
Correct.
And did she ever express to you what her husband thought about Dougie being in this program?
She said that he did not want Dougie to be in a school that long of the day. That long was too much.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
Recross.
Very quickly.
Ms. DeFazio, what Ms. Jensen told you was that her husband did not want her to get a job.
Yes.
And he did not want her to put Douglas in anything longer than what he was already in.
Yes.
Thank you.
That's it?
That's it.
Thank you. You're excused. Thank you.
Your Honor, there's an issue that the state would request we be allowed to take up outside the presence of the jury before the next witness is called.
We'll take our break then. We'll bring you back at 3 o'clock, okay? All right, the jury is outside the courtroom. Which witness are we talking about, Mr.
The
Jim?
next witness, Your Honor, would be Eric Schur.
What number is he on the list?
I'll get his number. 65.
55?
65, Your Honor.
65. All right, I got him. It says Eric Schuler, Charleston, South Carolina.
Yes, but in 1998, Your Honor, he was David Jensen's best friend in the third grade in Mrs. DeFazio's class. And the reason I wanted to take this up outside the presence of the jury, because there's an issue has come up about the admissibility of David's statements to various people in and around the first part of December. And so I wanted to explain the state's theory of the admissibility of David's statements before I put Eric Schur on the stand.
So he is here to testify.
Eric Schur is here to testify, yes. David Jensen, to our knowledge, is not here. This statement, this conversation between Eric Schur and David Jensen occurred, according to Eric Schur, either on the morning of December 2nd or the morning of December 3rd. But according to Mrs. Schur, she believed the conversation occurred on the morning of December 3rd. And the conversation was something like this. David had come to school, and he was telling Eric, his best friend, that his mother was sick, and his dad wouldn't take her to the hospital. And David demonstrated to Eric how his mother was breathing, and he gave a deep, rasping breathing sound, something like this. Now, at the time of the last trial, there was an objection on hearsay grounds, and it was overruled on hearsay grounds. Even though Eric Schur didn't testify that David appeared upset or anything like that, it was Judge Schrader at that time was admissible as an excited utterance nonetheless, given the greater latitude standard that applies to children. Since that time, Your Honor, there's been a United States Supreme Court decision about statements that children make. That's called Ohio versus Clark. That addresses the Confrontation Clause issues. And then there's been a Wisconsin Supreme Court decision called State versus Mercado, and that deals with applying the residual hearsay exception to the statements of small children. In Mercado, it was a sexual assault case, and the children were aged 4 to 7 years of age. And so we go first to Section 908.0. Section 908.
I'm just going to stop you. Did this court talk about an excited utterance in that decision? That you're
No, they talked about the exception under the residual hearsay rule.
Okay, that's what I want to know.
The Section 908.03 reads that the following are not excluded by the hearsay rule, even though the declarant is available as a witness. And then you go down to sub 24. And sub 24, which is known as the residual hearsay exception, but in the statute on parent 24 reads other exceptions, a statement not specifically covered by any of the foregoing exceptions, but having comparable circumstantial guarantees of trustworthiness. Now, the Wisconsin Supreme Court in State v. Mercado, 2021 Wis. 2nd 296, and the Northwestern site is 953 Northwest 2nd 337. Now, at page 350 of the Northwest version of this decision, the Wisconsin Supreme Court addressed the applicability of the residual hearsay exception to the statements of children. And it's sub D of the decision. Actually, that starts at 349. And 349 paragraph 54. They're talking about the child's statement at a video recording, but what they say is, we address the admissibility of NG's video recording under the residual hearsay exception, 908.03, sub 24, with stats. And then in determining the admissibility of a statement by a child under the residual hearsay exception, the court applied the following 5 factors. And they indicate we have set up 5 factors that the court looked to in determining whether a video recording of a child's statement meets circumstantial guarantees of trustworthiness. First, the attributes of the child making the statement should be examined, including age, ability to communicate verbally, to comprehend the statements or questions to others, to know the difference between truth and falsehood, and any fear of punishment, retribution, such as close familial relationship with the defendant, expressed by the child, which might affect the child's method of articulation or motivation to tell the truth. Second, the court should examine the person to whom the statement was made, focusing on the person's relationship with the child, whether that relationship might have an impact upon the statement's trustworthiness, and any motivation of the recipient of the statement to fabricate or distort its contents. Third, the court should review the circumstances under which the statement was made, including relation to the time of the alleged assault, or in this instance, the alleged incident, the availability of a person in whom the child might confide, and other contextual factors which might enhance or detract from the statement's trustworthiness. Fourth, the content of the statement itself should be examined, particularly noting any sign of deceit or falsity, and where the statement reveals a knowledge of matters not ordinarily attributable to children of a similar age. Finally, other corroborating evidence, such as physical evidence of assault or statements made to others, and opportunity or motive of the defendant, should be examined for consistency with the assertions made in the statement. Now, when you consider those 5 factors within this context, I believe that first of all, David Jensen's statement to Eric Schur is admissible as an excited utterance, as that term has been traditionally applied in the Wisconsin courts to statements by child witnesses since approximately 1895 in the case of State v. Proper, but culminating in State v. Mercado. But secondly, it meets the criteria for admissibility under the residual hearsay exception. That is, David Jensen had no motive to lie to Eric Schur at the time that he was telling his best friend in the world what was going on in his life at that precise moment. He'd just gotten to school, and he was telling Eric, my mom's really sick and my dad won't take her to the hospital. And then he showed Eric how his mother had been breathing. Now, this statement was made, we believe, on the morning of December 3rd because Mrs. Schur, Eric Schur's mother, will testify that Eric relayed to her the statement that David had made to Eric the previous morning, and she said that occurred on Friday morning, that Eric told her about David's statement on Friday morning, which was the morning after Julie's death. But Laura Schur had not yet heard of Julie's death when her son first told her about this. So the state believes that, first of all, I believe if you apply the sub 24 and you apply the excited utterance standard to the statement that David Jensen made to Therese DeFazio on December 2nd, it qualifies as both an excited utterance, but it also qualifies under the residual exception of the hearsay rule.
What's the Wisconsin site on this case that you keep talking about?
State v. Mercado, it's 2021 Wis 2nd 2.
It's just Wiz 2.
I'm sorry, yeah, WI 2. I'm sorry, it's 2021 WI 2. 395 Wis 2nd 296.
297?
296.
96. All right.
953 Northwest 2nd 337.
But it's 395 Wisconsin 2nd, right?
Yes, Your Honor. If you've got the hard books back there, it's 395.
I still keep the hard books. I'm old school.
I wish I could find a place that had them.
Here's what happens in trials. We have issues that come up that nobody can predict, and they're based upon rulings and how cases are coming in. And then the attorneys argue and they cite cases, and I think the prudent thing for the court and myself is to read that case and give the defense an opportunity to come up with some sort of response. So we're going to call another witness. I'll make a decision in the morning before we start as to this witness.
So, Judge, then, this does affect our plan because this affects two different witnesses. So what we would like to do is we have one other live witness who we can call right now, and then I think we should probably get into the videos that we can play.
That'd be wonderful.
Okay, and so I think we should probably just address this before we bring the jury back in. We have a proposed instruction to read to the jury before the videos.
Have you shown it to the defense? Is there any objection?
No,
Can I have the instruction?
absolutely.
So do we have it printed?
It's right here.
Is
Okay.
it printed?
Copy, right? That's our copy?
Yeah.
It's written out?
Read my handwriting.
He gave me one.
Okay, here's another one.
All right, so we have an agreement, what I read to the jury before you're going to do the video testimony, correct?
Yes.
All right.
That is accurate, and Judge, I would just like to, because our next witness I think is not very long. So what I would like is to technically make sure it's going to play.
Sure, because we're going to we got to take our break yet. I mean, I'm not a camel.
Okay.
It was out on the record, Your Honor.
So we'll take a break and you could work on the video.
When will you be back, Your Honor?
We'll give you 10 minutes, 10 after 3.
she has bees and she gives back to her community, and she lives on this gorgeous farm, and she's sort of the salt of the earth. But then it becomes very mystical and magical, and Kyler Lee plays my daughter. It's multi-generational. Sadie LaFlamme Snow plays my granddaughter, so it's 3 generations, which I also appreciate as a woman. That and it's a family drama, but more than a family drama. Something happens. I don't want to tell you what happens.
No spoilers.
Yeah, I can't do that. But I will tell you, I had to play myself in 1999, and that was a little scary because I'm an older woman, and we did some stuff with makeup, and I wear a wig and everything, and they use a Hasselblad lens, which is a portrait lens that gives it kind of a diffused. It gave sort of a magical feeling.
I feel like I've seen them do this, like in films with people.
Yeah. Anyway, but at the same time, I had to think about how I sounded and what is my body like, because you walk different. I had to, really was like on my arms, because they change, and all those kinds of things. So that was interesting as an actress, but also a little bit scary.
Absolutely.
So that was fun and challenging.
I don't know if anyone's noticed, my body's real different from 20. Look.
But I wasn't 20, not 20. I was 20 years younger. So let's say I would be playing 40.
Okay.
60s and 40s.
Okay, right on.
Still, that's a jump.
Different. So the series, you said it deals with generational kind of things. So generational trauma as well.
Generational trauma is a big part of the story.
Everyone can relate a little bit to that.
Oh, for sure. And I think we've become much more conscious about what that is.
And open.
And open and healthy. It's really healthy to talk about these things. But there is a lot of pain that exists. It's interesting, my relationship with my daughter is it's a very troubled relationship. There's a lot of healing that needs to be done, and I haven't really had time with my granddaughter because of this. I really loved playing that, the idea of finally having a relationship with the granddaughter, because I can relate to that. I just had my first grandchild, and I know what that feels like, and I can't imagine. I thought about that when I was developing this character, what it would feel like to have not had that relationship, to have it kept from me. So there's so many layers to the story that are really beautiful and were really interesting to play, and I loved working with these actresses. They did such a good job.
It's cool to work with different ages too. It's just different experiences coming together.
Yes, exactly.
A different kind of chemistry of it. Yeah. I feel like everyone has generational trauma. I feel like in some form, or whatever it is in your world. What was your relationship with your mother, since you're playing the mother in the...
Oh, yeah. Well, I had a very sort of codependent relationship with my mother. She was an alcoholic, and
wow, that's hard.
Yeah, it was hard. She played the organ at church. I mean, she would go to church, and we would be playing the organ, and we'd just be like, oh my God, is she going to make it? I mean, it was sad. It was really sad, and I ended up working. She was a teacher, but she couldn't keep those jobs, and she kept losing them. She kept changing schools, and eventually ended up working in McDonald's, and I worked at McDonald's with her. And
do you think you chose to do that? For a reason?
I was just happy to have a job.
Oh, okay. I just wanted because you noticed that she wasn't keeping the job. Oh, okay.
No, that wasn't it. But she had lost her driver's license. She had a couple of DUIs, and I was driving her to work on the day that she lost her job because she wasn't sober enough. And it was just, it was a lot of responsibility to make that call. Like, I thought she was sober enough. I mean, that was my job. Was
and you want to believe in your parent. You want to believe in that, right?
It wasn't even that. I mean, no. I mean, I really was taking care of her, honestly. I mean, it was me trying to figure out if she was sober enough, and I felt really guilty that...
That's a lot on a kid.
It's a lot. Yeah, it's a lot to say, oh, maybe you should call in. I just didn't think of it. Anyway, she got fired, and I asked for them to give her job back, but they didn't, so I quit. Which was
solidarity.
Yeah.
You're like, well, then I'm going to.
Yeah, what can I do? I wanted to stay after they fired her.
Yeah.
So.
I think what's interesting, too, is when I have, my own abandonment issues, things going on in my life, but I think what's interesting is how you perceive it as a child and how you accept things and you don't know it was kind of wrong or not cool. And then you have kids and you go, how in the world could you walk away from a child? How in the world could you not want to be involved? It's an interesting thing to have kids and have a completely different perspective on your childhood because of their childhood. You know what I'm saying? And then it's kind of cool too, because it's like, all right, I know what not to do. I know it didn't work, at least for me when I was a kid, so I'm going to try and do better.
I know I got a lot of things better than what I received postpartum, so many things that it could have been. And she was diagnosed as schizophrenia. So she, you know, she had a lot of trouble and was not able to get the care that she needed to get because of the time.
Which is why it's so important now that we're talking about stuff like this, so people have access and opportunity to care.
So important. But anyway, to get back to my beautiful children, I took this course on parenting, and one of the
That's cool.
and one of the things they taught us, like they asked, like people in the audience were saying, what do you think is the most important thing you do for your child? And they were like, oh, to make them being empathetic, to want to get back to their community, all these beautiful things. And he was like, yes, all these things are really beautiful, but the most important thing that you can give your child is to make them independent, so they can fly. You know.
Yeah.
Like, oh, well, that makes sense. Is to make mine have flown away.
Yeah. You've done a great job then. That's why I'm not a helicopter mom. I'm very independent with them. Like I think I was raised like that, so I think that's important.
Yeah.
Because then by the time they are flying away, you feel like they're prepared for that.
So mine definitely flew the coop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you nailed it. Way to go.
I know.
Killed it.
I know.
All right, everybody, we need another quick break. The Way Home premieres January 15th on Hallmark Channel. We will be right back with Whitney Peak from Gossip Girl.
Type 2 diabetes? Discover the Ozempic Trizone. In my Ozempic Trizone, I lowered my A1C, CV risk, and lost some weight.
In studies, the majority of people reached an A1C under 7 and maintained it. Ozempic lowers the risk of major cardiovascular events such as stroke, heart attack, or death in adults also with known heart disease. And you may lose weight. Adults lost up to 14 pounds. Ozempic isn't for people with type 1 diabetes. Don't share needles or pens or reuse needles. Don't take Ozempic if you or your family ever had medullary thyroid cancer or have multiple endocrineoplasia syndrome type 2 or if allergic to it. Stop Ozempic and get medical help right away if you get a lump or swelling in your neck, severe stomach pain, or an allergic reaction. Serious side effects may include pancreatitis. Gallbladder problems may occur. Tell your provider about vision problems or changes. Taking Ozempic with the Savano may increase
Good afternoon. Coming up on Fox 26 News at 5, Houston is the hardest hit city for credit card skimmers, and they're getting even harder to spot. We'll show you what you need.
Number 2?
2?
Yes.
All right.
All rise for the jury.
All right, we're back on the record on Mark Jensen. The appearances are the same. The jury is back in the courtroom. Sorry for the longer delay, but we were working out here when you were in the back. I just want you to know that. But that's not unusual in a trial. It's like live TV that's happening. We don't know what's going to happen, and we try to address it as quickly as we can. So with that, Ms. McNeil, who's your next witness?
The state calls Carrie Ashley.
All right. If you can come up here, ma'am, all the way up front, and you remain standing and raise your right hand. When you come up here, I will swear you in. You solemnly swear the testimony is meant to be the truth, whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Try to get as close as you can to the microphone. Spell your first and last name for the reporter.
Carrie, Ashley, Ashley.
Thank you. Go ahead, Ms. McNeil.
Ms. Ashley, can you tell us, back in 1998, Where were you living?
I was living 9025 Lakeshore Drive in Pleasant Prairie.
Okay, and is that in Kenosha County, Wisconsin?
Yes, it is.
Now, is that sometimes called the Carroll Beach neighborhood?
Yes.
And is that located near Lake Michigan?
Yes, we live directly on Lake Michigan.
So if you walk too far in your backyard, you're in the lake?
Yes.
Now, can you tell us about, by 1998, how long had you lived there?
We moved in spring of 1992.
So when you moved into this Carroll Beach neighborhood, did you meet a person by the name of Julie Jensen?
Shortly after we moved, yes. She came over to introduce herself.
And where did Ms. Jensen live in relationship to you?
Directly across the street.
And so is it correct that she was living in her home before you lived in your home?
Yes.
And when you moved in, you said she introduced herself?
Yes.
And so during this time period that we're talking about, from 1992 when you moved in until the end of 1998, how frequently would you see Julie Jensen?
We were in the same book club, so every month, and our sons were good friends, both in the same classes at school, same age, and then so whenever they had play dates and whenever we were outside playing with our kids and we saw each other outside, we would join each other. So I guess it would depend on the time of year, a lot more frequently in summer when everyone was outside. Otherwise, definitely once a month at book club.
Now, you said that you had a son that was the same age as one of Julie's sons. Is that correct?
Yes, actually, two were, Andy and David were in the same grade, same age, and Douglas and my younger son were, they were three years old at that time, 4 years old, so they hadn't started school yet.
And so would the children play together?
David and Andy would, yes. The younger two, no, not so much.
And when David and Andy would play, would you often see Julie Jensen during those times?
Yes.
And just to be clear, your son Andy, did he go to Southport Elementary School?
Yes, he did.
Now, can you describe in general Ms. Jensen's interactions with her children? Just describing her as a mother?
Well, she was a stay-at-home mom with them all the time, adored her kids, played with them. I mean, they were together all the time.
And did you notice anything different about that at any point, or was that consistent with Ms. Jensen?
I did not notice anything different at any point.
Now, I want you to think back to 1998. Do you recall the book club that would have occurred in November of that year?
Yes, it was always the second Tuesday of the month, and Julie was the host. And so she, everyone went to her house for the book club.
And when you went to that book club, about how long would it last?
It was typically 2 to 3 hours, from 7 to 8:39. Sometimes it would go longer, but usually in that time frame.
And so do you remember anything about Julie hosting that book club? Was she a good host?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the host always had food and beverages, and there was nothing different about that. She was a good host. She was a good loved to bake. So.
So I want to direct your attention to the time period after that November book club and approaching the time of Julie's death. Do you remember Ms. Jensen ever talking about looking for a job?
There was one instance I remember. It would have been Monday of the week that she died. I was coming home from running errands, and she was outside with another neighbor, and she was visibly upset. So I went over and joined the conversation, and she said that she would be looking for a job and that Douglas was put in daycare.
So at that time, based upon what Julie said, your understanding was Douglas was in daycare?
Yes.
And do you know whether that would have been full-time or part-time?
No, I do not.
Now, you mentioned Julie had some hobbies and she was a good baker. Did she also like gardening?
I would say that gardening was probably her passion. She was always out in the yard in summer and spring and summer.
And so is that one of the reasons you would frequently see her outside?
That and playing with the kids. Mm-hmm.
And would you also see her outside in connection with the kids playing at the pool?
Well, the pool was in the backyard, so I would have to say no to that, but they would be in the driveway playing with bikes and that kind of thing.
And did your kids ever play in the pool?
Yeah. Typically, Fridays were my days off, so if we were to go to the pool, it would be on a Friday.
Now, I want you to specifically think back to December 2nd of 1998. On that day, did you have a conversation with the defendant, Mark Jensen?
I had a mutual friend had a baby, and I had called the Jensen home later in the day, and Mark had answered the phone.
And so just so I'm understanding this correctly, you were calling the Jensen home because a friend had a baby?
I wanted to let Julie know that our friend had her baby.
And do you remember who that friend was?
Yes.
And who was that?
Angie Behrens at that time. I mean, she's...
So you heard the news and your intention was to share that with Julie, is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay, and so what happened when you called the Jensen residence that day?
Mark just said that Julie was sick in bed and she was sick with the flu and couldn't come to the phone. So I asked him just to relay the message to her.
And you said that he said she was sick with the flu?
Mark had indicated that.
And she could not come to the phone?
Correct.
So fair to say on December 2nd of 1998, you did not talk with Julie Jensen?
No.
So now I want to direct your attention to the very next day, December 3rd of 1998. Was there anything that occurred on December 3rd of 1998 that you saw that caused you concern?
When I came home from work, there was a lot of rescue squads and fire trucks out on the road, flashing lights. So yeah, it was a little disheartening to come upon that. I hadn't known what had happened, but there were some neighbors in the yard, so I quickly got out of my car and was told what had happened.
Okay, so you're basically driving up into this?
Yes.
And because your house is right across the street, you have to go right to where these vehicles are?
Yes.
And so then when you got out of your car, what were you thinking?
I guess I initially thought that maybe there was an accident with one of the kids possibly hurting themselves. I just wasn't sure.
And so how did you find out what happened?
Truthfully, at some point I know that Mark had come across the street and told us that Julie had passed. I don't know if that was the initial time I had found out or if someone told me as I exited my car. I just can't remember which one it was first, but I do remember speaking briefly with Mark.
All right, and so during that conversation, when Mark Jensen came over, can you describe what you observed about his demeanor?
Just, I guess, very anxious. That's about it.
And would you describe him as upset or crying? Did you notice anything like that?
No, I would say no, he was not.
Do you recall whether he was smoking at the time or not?
I don't recall. I know he smoked, but I don't remember.
Now, did you also end up attending Julie Jensen's wake or visitation, sometimes
Yes.
people call it?
Mhm.
You did. And do you have an estimate about how soon after her death that occurred?
It had to have been a few days, 4 or 5 days. I mean, it was less than a week, so very quick.
And at the wake, did you see Mark Jensen?
Yes, I did.
And did you make any observations about his demeanor at the wake?
We were waiting in line at the wake, just waiting to speak with the family, and I guess I would just say that, I mean, as he was greeting the guests, he just did not seem upset, more laughing and carrying on with the people he was talking with.
Now, I'd like you to think about after the wake. First of all, in that neighborhood, when was the garbage collected? Do you recall what day?
It was Mondays.
All right, and so at some Monday after the wake, did you notice anything particular about the garbage outside the Jensen home?
There was just a lot more garbage bags, some big hefty bags out on the curb to be picked up, and there was some of Julie's belongings that weren't in bags, that were more spoon on the top, I guess.
And so can you give us an estimate of the time frame, how soon after the wake this was?
It would have been soon, so probably the next Monday.
And so you specifically described, was it more garbage bags than usual?
Yes.
And did you say you specifically saw some of Julie's things?
Yes.
And what can you remember about Julie's things?
I don't remember exactly. It just, there was, whether they were sweaters or dresses or what, but they were definitely women's clothes out in the garbage.
And so when you saw that, you recognize those as Julie's?
Well, they were women's clothing, so.
Now, at some point after Julie Jensen's death, did you come to be introduced or to know a woman, Kelly Labonte?
Yes, I did.
And about how soon after Julie Jensen's death did you see her at the Jensen residence?
It's really hard for me to pinpoint exactly how long, but I was told that she was helping out babysit, and so I would say within the month.
Now I want you to think to the time period of January of 1999. Do you recall anything about any birthday party during that time period?
At the Jensen household? That would have
Correct.
been David's.
Okay, and so his birthday would have been around that time period?
Mm-hmm.
And so do you have any recollection of whether Kelly was at that birthday party?
No, I do not.
Do you know if your son attended that birthday party?
Yes, he did.
And your son was in the same class at Southport Elementary
Yes.
as David Jensen?
Yes, he was.
Now, can you just tell us, would the kids generally get on the same bus together? How would they get to the school?
They took the bus in the morning together, and it was, they usually would wait in our driveway for the bus. If it was cold or rainy, they would wait in the garage. Sometimes inside.
Okay, and in the morning, that's what they would do?
Yes.
Okay, and then obviously in the evening, they just go to their home?
Well, I was a working mom, so my kids would go to daycare after work a few days a week. Otherwise, they would take the bus home. And
No further questions,
All
thank
right,
you.
we can do the cross.
Thank you, Judge. Ms. Ashley, shortly after Ms. Jensen's death, you were contacted by Detective Paul Ratzberg.
I don't know exactly how long, but at some point I was, yes.
It wasn't like a couple of years later. It was within a normal amount of time after her passing. Is that a yes?
Yes.
Thank you. And you spoke to the detective who came to your home,
Yes.
and he wanted to talk to you about some of the medication that Julie Jensen had been taking.
Don't remember that.
And do you remember telling him that Julie Jensen had been taking sleeping pills?
I wouldn't have known that. So, no.
That's
I
fair.
would have
Thank
never
you.
said that.
Did you tell Detective Ratzberg that you knew little about the Jensens, except that the police had been in contact with your family about prowlers around the Jensen home?
I would have never said that either.
Because you knew the Jensens,
Exactly.
and they were your neighbors.
Correct.
So if Detective Ratzberg put that in his report, that would be incorrect.
Correct. It would have been that I didn't know anything about the prowlers.
Right.
but-
You knew about them, you just didn't know about the Jensen prowlers.
Correct.
And if he wrote that in his report, that just would have been wrong.
Yes. Correct. Wrong.
I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the people you spoke to after Julie Jensen's death.
Okay.
You knew Therese DeFazio.
Yes.
She was your son's teacher.
Yes.
She was also a neighbor.
No.
Did she live in the same neighborhood?
No.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. So you just knew her from your son's school?
Yes.
And it'd be fair to say that you spoke to her about Julie Jensen?
I went to school I drove my son to school the following day, and I told her what had happened, and that was it.
And you talked to her about what you saw?
No, I just told her that Julie had passed.
You didn't tell her that you had seen like ambulances or anything like that? You just said Julie Jensen's passed away?
That's as far as I remember, yes.
Thank you. And did Ms. DeFazio tell you about conversations she had with Julie Jensen?
She made a brief statement.
So she did tell you some stuff about what Julie Jensen told her?
Very brief, yes.
You also were neighbors with the Voights,
Correct.
and you would have talked to them about Julie Jensen's death.
Brief conversation, correct, yes.
And were those conversations also 1 or 2 days after Julie Jensen's death?
I can't answer that. I don't remember how soon after.
And they told you about what Julie Jensen had said to them during this brief conversation?
They told me that they had a conversation with Julie. At that time, they did not tell me exactly what was the conversation.
You had testified earlier that you had gone to a book club in November,
Yes,
and that was at Julie Jensen's home.
yes,
And there's usually food and drinks.
correct.
Julie Jensen didn't express any concerns about eating or drinking anything at her home?
No,
Julie Jensen never expressed any concern or told you that she was afraid of her husband?
no,
You never saw anything going on in the Jensen home that would cause you concerns?
no,
When you talked about seeing Julie outside with the boys, you also saw Mark Jensen outside with the boys,
yes,
playing basketball.
Yes.
walking the dog,
Yes.
hanging out in the front yard.
Yep.
Now, you and Julie Jensen were neighbors for a number of years
Yes.
and also attended a book club together.
Yes.
Your families didn't vacation together.
No.
You would hang out if you were outside,
Correct.
but it's not like you would go on trips together.
No.
She did talk to you about someone who was harassing her.
Yes.
Do you remember that?
It was a very brief discussion, and she said that she believed that someone was breaking into her home to harass her.
And she told you that was a gentleman by the name of Perry Tarika.
She never said any names, so I don't know.
That's fair. Did she tell you that the person she believed was harassing them was someone she had had an affair with?
A brief affair, yes.
Outside of the conversation about the affair, you didn't talk to Julie Jensen about any issues in her marriage?
No.
She didn't tell you her marriage was in trouble?
No.
She didn't. Did she tell you did she tell you she thought her husband was going to divorce her?
No.
She did say she didn't want to get a job.
Correct. She wanted to stay at home with Douglas.
And that day you spoke to her, the Monday before her passing, she was upset
Yes.
because she didn't want to get a job.
Correct.
She didn't want Douglas to be in daycare all day.
And that's what she indicated, yes.
And she wanted to stay at home with him.
Yes.
You were asked a little bit about the bus schedule. And I think your testimony was you saw them in the morning, but not the afternoon.
Not all afternoons, correct, but
You were working.
3 to 4 days a week, yes.
So during the days, 3 to 4 days a week, you were at work.
Yes.
You weren't watching what was going on at the Jensen home.
No.
You weren't watching who was getting on or off a bus.
No.
You weren't watching to see who was picking up or dropping off children.
No.
You testified that a week or two after Julie Jensen's funeral that there was more than normal amount of garbage bags outside. Is that correct?
Correct.
And you were aware that family was staying at the Jensen home that had come in from out of town.
No, I was not aware of that.
You don't know if they were working to clean up the house.
Yeah, no, I was not aware, so no.
You don't know if they were packing up some items in order to donate to Goodwill.
No.
You wouldn't have been home to see like St. Vincent de Paul pick up items.
No.
You didn't see any. Oh, you have to use the microphone a little bit more.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
it's okay, sorry. You didn't see any keepsakes outside.
No.
You didn't see any photos.
No.
Miss Ashley, you spoke about seeing Mr. Jensen at the funeral,
Yes.
and you also spoke about seeing him on December 3rd.
Yes.
You weren't with Mr. Jensen when he found his wife.
No.
You don't know his reaction.
No.
You weren't there when the police told him that his wife had passed.
No.
You didn't see that reaction.
No.
You said you saw him talking at the funeral, to visitation, sorry.
Yes.
And that was to people that were paying their respects and coming up to talk to him.
Yes.
You don't know what their relationship was with Mark Jensen
Correct.
or Julie Jensen.
Correct.
You don't know if they were telling stories about a childhood memory or something that happened in college.
Correct.
It'd be fair to say that sometimes people reminisce at visitations.
Yes.
People laugh.
Yes.
People cry.
Correct.
And some people cry in their own way at their own time.
I'm objecting. This is argument.
Why don't we ask another question. You made your point.
Thank you, Judge. I have no further questions.
Hang on. All right, can you get closer to the mic, ma'am? Thank you.
I'm all finished, Judge. Thank you.
Any redirect?
So I just want to clarify the prowler issue. So is it true that the police did ask you at some point about prowlers being around the Jensen residence?
Yes,
And you knew little about that, correct?
correct. I had never seen anything suspicious in the neighborhood.
And what you knew is what Julie had told you, where she suspected it was this man she had an affair with.
Correct.
And so that's what you knew little about.
Yes.
Okay. I have nothing further.
Anything on those brief questions?
No, Judge.
Thank you. All right, you're excused. Thank you. Have a good day. Does the prosecution want me to read the instruction on the recorded testimony?
I do. Thank you, Judge.
And the defense have an objection to the reading?
No.
All right, the attorneys have agreed to this instruction now. I'm going to read it to you, and hopefully everybody can hear me. If you can't hear me, raise your hand, okay? Or throw your pencil this way. That'll be the signal. All right, jury instruction regarding recorded testimony. You will be hearing and seeing previously recorded testimony of witnesses who are no longer available to testify in person. You are instructed to ignore the logo which may appear on these videos because it has no relevance to this case. You are further instructed that this recorded testimony is evidence and should be evaluated the same way as the witnesses who testify in person. So with that, can we have the videos?
Yes, Judge, this is, for the record, this is going to be State's Exhibit number 7. So that would be the recorded the recorded testimony of Margaret Voigt. And
Is she listed as a witness?
she is listed. Let me give you her number. It's towards the end.
Her first name looks different than that, Judge. Doesn't say Margaret.
What number is it?
She is number 74.
74. All right.
And Judge, I would just ask if this is another volume issue. If the volume is problematic, I would just ask that the jurors notify the court.
They are ready to throw their pencils. I think it should work, folks.
Oh, so now the volume is not working at all. Let me try to fix that. It's because my computer's muted.
You're married to Ted?
Yes.
For the record, will you please state your full name and spell your name?
It's Margaret Voigt, W-O-J-T.
And Mrs. Voigt, you're married to Ted?
Yes.
How long have you and Ted been married?
Over 25 years now.
At some point, did you come to move in next door to the Jensens?
Yes, we moved from Chicago.
And when was that?
I would say 93, 94.
Can you, do you remember the first time you met Julie Jensen?
Well, I seen her when we were building a house across the street. Probably spoke to her a few words, but then we talked more when we purchased the property next door to them, a lot on which we built a house. And then we met at the closing.
So, Judge, the volume was a bit low for the witness, so I'm just going to restart it. The defense and I are agreeing to that.
Is everybody hearing the witness that we're trying? Yeah, everybody's saying yes, so who's having the issue? Oh.
Bridget wants to hear him too.
All right, well, we'll restart it then, and hopefully we will finish it.
It will take us till 5, and then that's the end of this video, Judge.
For the record, will you please state your full name and spell your name?
It's Margaret Voigt, W-O-J-T.
And Mrs. Voigt, you're married to Ted? In next door to the Jensens?
Yes, we moved from Chicago.
And when was that?
I would say 93, 94.
Can you, do you remember the first time you met Julie Jensen?
Well, I seen her when we were building a house across the street. Probably spoke to her a few words, but then we talked more when we purchased the property next door to them, a lot on which we built a house. And then we met at the closing.
And then you moved in next door to them?
Then we moved next door to them.
When did you move into that house?
94.
And did you come to know Mark and Julie Jensen?
Yes, we send them on regular basis.
Did your two families socialize together on occasion?
Yes.
Tell us some of the circumstances under which you might get together and socialize with the Jensens.
Oh, at that time we had 2 daughters, and they had only David. So the kids would play with each other. The Jensens, they had a swimming pool, which my girls really liked, so they would be invited over to use it. And on other basis, we would, with Julie, we would go, we'd take the kids to Great America, we'd take them to the zoo. When the kids were little, we would have birthday parties together. As a family, go out for dinner a few times, have a dinner at their house.
So did you feel you came to know Julie Jensen pretty well over the years?
Yes.
Did you consider her a good friend?
Yes.
Tell the jury your perception of what kind of a person Julie Jensen was.
Well, first of all, she was very caring. She loved her boys. She would do anything for them. And I always trust her. I would always go her with any question, or if I had some kind of problems, as far as finding maybe a doctor or a dentist or whatever, because we just moved into the neighborhood. She would be the one that I would go and talk to.
You trusted her judgment?
Yes.
Were you familiar with any of Julie's interests or hobbies?
Yes, I knew she loved her garden. She was good at sewing and crafts and baking. She baked very good. Whenever she had anything, it was just.
Did you ever have any of the stuff that she baked?
Yes.
Was she a good baker?
Oh yes.
I mean, some people enjoy it; they're not good at it, but she was pretty good at it.
She was, and she gave me a few recipes too.
Did there come a time when when Julie ever confided in you that she was having problems in her marriage?
Closer to her dad, I would say I heard from my husband sooner than I heard from her personally. So maybe like a couple weeks before her dad, she would actually tell me a few things about the problems in the family and the marriage.
But your husband had been talking to you before that?
Yes.
And did you give your husband any advice when he was telling you about the problems at in the Jensen household?
Actually, I did. I told him not to get involved.
So then a few weeks before Julie's death, tell us about the conversation that occurred between you and Julie.
Well, we met quite often, but the whole conversation wasn't only about the problem in the family. We would talk about the boys, about the different kind of things, and then she would say something like, one time she said that it was very strange that Mark would ask her how she felt after the miscarriage, and he would make a note about it. And she didn't know what that was all about. She was getting scared that he's planning something and she didn't know what.
When was that conversation, if you can recall?
I would say within 2 weeks prior her Julie's death.
So maybe mid-November 1998?
Yes.
Did you know that Julie had had a miscarriage?
Yes.
When did she have her miscarriage?
I don't remember, but I remember Mark bringing David over to my house that morning, and David, I had to take him to school later because he was taking Julie to a hospital.
Do you remember, was that the same year of Julie's death, or was it a year or two before, or don't you remember?
I don't remember.
Okay. And did she tell you why she thought it was strange that Mark would ask her how she felt after the miscarriage?
Well, because he never done anything like this before. He would, and it sounded like he never cared how she felt. So that was strange. That all of a sudden he wants to know how she felt, you know.
And then he'd make a note of it?
Yes.
Now, was that the first time that Julie had related to you that she had some concerns about Mark, or had there been other times?
This probably was one of the first times. And then another time I spoke to Julie relating the problems was that week before her death, like Monday and Tuesday. And one of the things was we mentioned the divorce. It came up to it, and I said, why don't you divorce? And she said that Mark would kill me first before he divorced me.
Now you said that was the Monday before her death, or the Monday of the week before her death?
That was Monday or Tuesday of that week before her death.
So it was the same week of her death?
Yes.
And when you had that conversation with her, were you talking to her outside or talking to her on the phone?
Outside.
How long was that conversation, and how did that issue come up?
Well, another question was, I asked her, we talked about the job at the same time because I knew she was applying. So she said she hadn't heard from any of the places that she had applied. And also she talked about Douglas being in the daycare all day. That upset her a lot because she wanted to stay home with him till at least he goes to kindergarten, full time.
In that week, during the time that you're having this conversation with Julie about Douglas and daycare and so forth, about how old was Douglas at that time?
I think he was probably 4.
And Julie seemed committed to staying home with Douglas?
Oh, yes. Yes, she loved to stay home with her children, with her boys.
This conversation that occurred between you and Julie on the Monday or Tuesday of the week of her death, how long was that conversation, would you say?
I remember talking to her a few times. So maybe like at one time, it was 5 minutes, another time maybe 10 minutes. So it was few conversations the same day.
And did you know where Douglas was at the time that she was having this conversation with you?
Douglas wasn't there, so I'm assuming that he was at the daycare, that all-day daycare that he started that week.
Well, tell me, did you know when Douglas started going into daycare?
That week of Julie's death, he's supposed to start it on Monday or Tuesday.
And you heard that from whom?
Julie.
Had he been attending any daycare in the weeks preceding that?
Yes, but it was only half day.
What part of the day was it, do you know?
No.
You didn't know if it was in the morning or in the afternoon, or?
I would speculate.
If you don't know,
I don't know.
Okay,
No.
that's fine. So how many conversations did you have with Julie in the 2 weeks or so preceding her death where she had made reference to the status of her marriage?
It was quite a few. I cannot give you a number, but I seen her here and there, and she would tell me things. But like I said, not every time when we talk, she would say about her problems because she knew that I already know from my husband what's going on. So.
So are there any other things that you can remember that Julie told you in the weeks preceding her death concerning the status of her relationship with her husband?
Well, I remember I remember one more thing. Tuesday, standing there, I actually asked her, first of all, I said, Julie, I know I didn't want to be involved, but I feel like I'm already involved. And then I said, I asked her, do you really think that Mark would do something to you? And she said, yes.
Did you ever offer Julie any advice?
No.
You never suggested to her she should do one thing or another?
No.
You were talking about this conversation on Tuesday. That was the Tuesday before her death?
Yes.
And where did this conversation occur?
That was on her driveway. I remember she came home from grocery shopping.
Did she ever talk to you about going to a doctor at all?
Yes, she did. As a matter of fact, that was that same day.
What did she say to you about going to the doctor?
She just said it. I went to the doctor, and she never said why, and she never said that, she's not feeling well. She just said, I went to a doctor, so it was kind of strange. I didn't know why.
Well, would it be fair to say that you saw Julie on a regular basis, on a weekly basis, in the weeks and months preceding her death?
Yes.
Did you notice any change in her physical condition in the months preceding Julie's death?
I really didn't. Maybe because I knew, that she's being sad and, that what's going on with all the problems. So I really didn't notice anything.
So when was the last time that you spoke to Julie Jensen, person to person, where you could actually see each other face to face?
Tuesday.
And about what time of the day was that?
It was before the boys came back from school, so it had to be before 3 o'clock.
And is that when the conversation about the doctor came up?
Yes.
And did she tell you anything about her visit to the doctor?
That's all she said. She said, I went to a doctor, and that's all. I didn't ask.
That's the last time you saw Julie Jensen alive?
Yes.
Was that the last time you ever talked to her?
No, I spoke to her on the phone.
When did you speak to her on the phone?
On Wednesday, the day before she died.
What time was it that you spoke to her on Wednesday?
I remember it was around 10 o'clock in the morning. I was in the kitchen. I saw Mark leaving